Well, I'm up here because I love the Lone Pine Film Museum, and my dad made his the first time he was Roy Rogers, it was here in Lone Pine on a movie called Under Western Stars. So as a family, we feel a real connection here. He made 4 other films here as well. Mom was in 3 of them. Buttermilk got his name up here. He was a roping pony for Dad's trainer and so Glenn brought him up here. Glenn Randall, his trainer, brought him up here. And one of the wranglers was talking to Mom and said, "Oh, look at that sky, it looks like clabber." And she says, "What in the world is that?" He says, "Well, you know, buttermilk." And so Mom says, "Well, yes, buttermilk." And that's what her buckskin horse became, Buttermilk, after that. You know, it's one of those things. I'm the oldest of the Rogers. Dad and his wife Arlene adopted me, and I was born in Dallas, Texas. I got to California when I was about 4 months old, because back then if you adopted a baby, it was like adopting a puppy or a cat now. You had to have all of your shots and a certificate of good health. And so I was, a couple of months after he found me in Dallas, I came to California, lived here a good portion of my life, and grew up in all over the San Fernando Valley, and for a couple of years even in Hollywood. As a little kid, I grew up on the lot at Republic Studios. Mommy didn't have great health, and so Dad would take me to work with him, and all the people at Republic were my babysitters. And I fell in love with the movie business. I mean, it is a very different way of making a living and of doing, but so many, especially back then, the crews were like families. So I always feel really at home when I'm up here, especially in the museum, because they've got so many things. I ran Dad's museum for about 5 years when Dad's health started deteriorating. Then my brother came in and they moved the museum, so I quit. And now I live in Utah. I've got a couple of books out. The first one is called Cowboy Princess, and it's really about growing up in the family and how each of the 9 of us, because they had a his, hers, theirs, and adopted family of 9 kids. We had our own mini United Nations. My one sister is full-blood Choctaw Indian. Dad was part Choctaw. And she was from the same orphanage I was, called Hope's Cottage in Dallas, Texas. Debbie Lee was Korean and Puerto Rican. My brother Sandy was an abused child that was in a home in Kentucky. And my sister Marion, we never got to adopt her. She was their foster daughter, and then she married one of our classmates. But she was from Edinburgh, Scotland, and they found her when she was 13 years old. I was 14, we were 6 months apart, so we were classmates. And it was a really interesting life, and a lot of it is in a window here at the museum. They've got audio that I did for them and a lot of pictures and all in the Royandale window. So that's been fun. The second book I wrote is called Cowboy Princess Rides Again, and that was because I didn't write really about Mom and Dad's careers. In the first book, I figured everybody knew who Roy Rogers was, therefore they knew who Dale Evans was. And then I would come up to an event and there were so many more questions. So the second book was really trying to answer the questions that people still had. And Now I'm working on a third book. A friend of mine, Ann Kessner, and I are working on a book tentatively called The Dale We Knew, and it's mostly about Mom. For her day and age, she was the most incredible woman, but she came from a family of incredible women. They were Southerners who settled in Texas, and my grandmother and all 6 of her sisters all had college educations. They all had degrees, and for a woman in the South back then, that was very unusual before the turn of the century. And anyway, it's been really interesting. I've got a couple of websites out there. One is just CherylROgers.com. You can go to CherylROgers, no D, .com. And you can contact me there whenever you want. Also, I have videos on my website of interviews that I've done here at Lone Pine at the film festival. I did it a couple of years in a row, years ago. Some great actors and all on it. Andy Prine, Denny Miller, Dick Jones, A.C. Lyles, who was an executive at Paramount. The only person I ever knew of that went to work on a job when he was 12 years old. He went to work for a subsidiary of Paramount in Florida, and he was still with them when he passed at, I think, 92 is when he passed. He was still an executive by that time with Paramount. Well, he was an usher, I think, there in Florida. He was an usher at the movie house, and then, got here, and he was an incredible man. He knew everybody. He never forgot a name or a face, which I think is one of the reasons that he rose so far at Paramount. He knew everybody. He was the nicest man. Well, I've been so lucky with doing those interviews, and well, with coming here, I have gotten reacquainted with people that I knew when I was a little tiny thing, but I've met so many new people that worked in the Westerns. And I told some people earlier today, I think actors made Westerns because they loved playing cowboys and Indians, because the Western movies didn't pay quite what the other movies made. They never got the recognition. They never, the industry as a whole and the Oscars and the award shows and all. Western movies outside of High Noon and 2 or 3 others of the giant ones that were made by the big studios. Westerns just never got the recognition from the industry. They didn't consider them as art. Dad's name was Leonard Sly. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, at what was for many years second base of Riverfront Stadium. He was born in an apartment above a shop that was there before the stadium was built. So one of the prized possessions that Dad had at the Roy Rogers Museum when it was still around was a signed second base that all of the great players, Johnny Bench and that incredible team there, they all signed second base and sent it to Dad. So he had that in the museum forever. He was a great singer and a fine musician. He played anything with strings. He started out, he and a cousin, at about 10, they were calling square dances. By that time, the family had moved to Duck Run, Ohio. Find that on a map, but it's really close to Portsmouth, Ohio, which is right on the river. And Dad and his cousin Stan called square dances. Then Dad and my grampy, they came to California during the Depression, and during the Dust Bowl years. They came out here to California because there was work and you could pick fruit and vegetables and you got to eat some of what you were picking. It was very much the Grapes of Wrath. In my book, I have a picture of Gramps and Dad and Mammy, my grandmother, and their dog in this beat-up old Dodge, and it does look like the Grapes of Wrath. And that's how Dad and Grampy went back to Ohio and picked up my grandmother and Dad's kid sister and came to California. By that time, one of his sisters was living in Hawthorne area, and he got on one of the talent shows that was like midnight. It was on. He was heard by a group of musicians who needed a singer, and he yodeled incredible. When he was a kid, what they had was a record player and a couple of the, well, not even records, but they were those cylinders, and a couple of the cylinders they had was a Swiss yodeler. So he imitated that and he learned how to yodel, and then he developed his own yodeling style. Anyway, these musicians heard him. They asked him if he wanted to sing with them. So he got on with, the first group was the Rocky Mountaineers. Then through other groups, like most musicians, it didn't stop with just one. There was another and then another, and he met Tim Spencer and Bob Nolan, and they formed the Pioneer Trio. They added two more musicians, the Farr brothers, Hugh and Carl Farr, who were musicians from New Orleans. They were jazz musicians. Anyway, they joined this group. And I don't remember if it was Dad's idea or Bob Nolan's idea, but they yodeled in harmony. Nobody did that. And it got them recognized, and they made a couple of shorts, and then they did 2 Gene Autry films. Dad was noticed. I mean, he was so good looking. And the studio signed him to a contract at $75 a week, and he left the Pioneers and went to work for the studio. Gene Autry went out on strike, as he had done before. He was more of a businessman who happened to be a talented singer. I wish Dad had been a businessman who happened to be a talented singer. But anyway, Dad, through one thing or another, as I talk about in my books, got a chance to try out for the part in a movie that had been written for Gene called Wall Street Cowboy. They already had Dad signed to a contract for $75 a week, so it didn't cost them anything to put him in that film in the leading role. When that movie came out, it was named as one of the best movies of the year. And yeah, under Western Stars, and he became Roy Rogers. Thanks to the guys who redid Macintosh and TJ, they redid Under Western Stars as well. And there is a double DVD out that has both Dad's very first and very last movies. Dad made 97 or something films as Roy Rogers. And he left Republic. He did a movie, or 2 movies actually, with Bob Hope, Son of Paleface, and then he had a cameo in another one of Hope's films, and then he started his own production company and did the Roy Rogers TV show for 5 years. I mean, he was just so talented. I don't know, hundreds of recordings, music recordings. He recorded for Decca and RCA, which is, Sony took over so much of the stuff that they did and all. Anyway, that was Dad's. Then with Mom, she was from Uvalde, Texas, which has now become a horrible place to talk about, darn it. But it was a great little tiny nothing when Mom was there, although James Nance Garner, who was a vice president of the United States, was from there. And she accelerated in school. I'm afraid that I sort of inherited the same gene, even though we weren't related. But when I was 14, I really thought that I knew everything and that I was an adult. I started working summers when I was 12, and I was making money and all. Anyway, Mom married at 14, married the big man on campus, and had a baby after her 15th birthday, and was divorced by 16. And she went to secretarial school, my grandmother insisted, and got a job at an insurance company, was humming at her desk, and her boss says, well, do you want to sing on the radio? We sponsor this radio show. She was in Memphis, and she said, sure. She didn't know anything about singing on the radio, but she'd give it a try. And I mean, really quick, she had her own 15-minute radio show when she was 16 years old. And then the Depression hit, and like everybody, I mean, the Depression tore the country apart. And she really scraped by for a long time, she and my brother Tommy. Tommy went and lived with my grandparents in Texas. Mom went up to Chicago and worked there. Her health broke. She went back to Texas and got on the radio there after she recovered her health. She met a musician named Dale Butts, our Dale Butts, and he started arranging music and all for her. He was on radio there as a musician. They got married, moved to Chicago. She got on CBS up there, I believe, and was one of the staff singers. She and Nat King Cole were staff singers. Anyway, she went with a couple of the big bands, and with Anson Weeks Orchestra. She went to San Francisco and then LA to the wonderful Coconut Grove restaurant, which was a historic nightclub that was located in one of the big hotels there in LA. A fellow came in one evening and heard her singing and got her a screen test at 20th Century. They hired her for one movie with the option for two, but then she did Orchestra Wives with George Montgomery and Ann Rutherford, but they told her afterwards that they already had Betty Grable signed, and she was sort of the same type as Betty Grable. So she went back on radio and became a radio star thanks to Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy and Gary Moore and Jack Carson. She was on 3 different of the big radio shows of the time. Got her a contract at Republic. They didn't quite know what to do with her, but since she was from Texas, they said, well, of course you can ride. And she, by that time, had an agent and had been told, you never say no. So she didn't say that she could ride. She just said, well, I'm from Texas, aren't I? And got put in one of Dad's movies. And yeah, they made 28 films together, I think. When they got married, the studio suspended her because they were building Dad. By that time, Mommy had died, and they were building Dad up with this huge campaign, and he was the bachelor father of Hollywood type of thing. So they suspended her when they got married, not him, her. And then the fans demanded she be put back. So they put her back in his films. Then she got pregnant with my baby sister, Robin. So they suspended her again. And anyway, I mean, it was being a female movie star that was tough. But, you know, after Robin passed, they started adopting children. And they became legends. They really did. I mean, they were known all over the world. Mom, I think for her first book, which was about my baby sister, Angel Unaware was the name, and it's published in I don't even know how many languages all over the world. It's still in publication. And it was about Robin, who had Down syndrome and died 2 days before her second birthday. And that was the only baby they had together. They just were incredible, talented, gifted, handsome, beautiful people. Well, Mom came up with her very last book, which ended up being titled Rainbow on a Hard Trail, but she had worked with, my husband Larry was sort of her editor on that book, and the publishers gave it that name. But Larry and Mom, when they sent it to the publishers, the name was A Stroke of Hope, because she'd had a stroke and Dad had passed by that time. And that's really what the book is about, was how she was coping with everything. And I think A Stroke of Hope was a much better name. She had been on Trinity Broadcast Network for 17 years. She had a show called A Date with Dale, and did a lot of personal testimony and interviewed a lot of her friends and other people that she didn't know. Anyway, every time on her show, she'd say, and buy my new book, A Stroke of Hope. And we'd have to say, no, no, no. You know that? They changed the name, Mom. But yeah, she was wonderful. She influenced so many people. Well, and so did Dad. I mean, for about 3 years, I was the manager of the Roy Rogers Dale Evans Museum in Victorville. Dad's health was failing, and then Mom's health was failing. But while I was doing the museum, I initiated an education program and all, and we used some of Mom's stuff in there. And I would get these letters from teachers all over the country, and even from a professor up in Canada, saying that they used Angel Unaware to teach empathy in their classrooms, to teach kids about handicapped children. I mean, just the influence they had. And with Dad, everywhere I've gone, young men, now old men, would come up to me and say that they became a fireman or a policeman or a school teacher thanks to having been a fan of Dad's as a kid, that Dad taught them right from wrong. He had the Roy Rogers Writers Club rules, and whenever they became a member of the Writers Club, they would get those, and
He was a real icon of this period.
it was. He was an icon for his generation, and I think the example that they set and the way they did their lives and all was really fantastic. I got to participate, being the oldest, I got to participate a couple times more than my siblings in some of the rodeos and things. I traveled to Canada with them, and to Tennessee, and to Texas. And I mean, the fans, the people that would turn out, every venue that they played in, they would set the record. They broke the record at Madison Square Garden just about every time they went back. And I think one of the main things is that when I was little and going to the shows with them, you never saw handicapped children, ever. I mean, handicapped children were really sort of hidden by their families. When Robin was diagnosed with Down syndrome, the doctors told Mom and Dad, don't take this baby home. Put her in a hospital because she's never going to be normal. She probably won't even recognize you. It will break your hearts. Just put her in a hospital and let her go. Well, they refused to do that. They brought her home, and they talked about Robin. And if we were doing a magazine layout with Linda Lou and Dusty and I, if Robin was well enough that day, she was part of the family magazine layout. And so people all over knew that they had a handicapped child. Within like 4 years, 5 years of Robin's death, we started seeing handicapped kids at all of the shows. I mean, it was just such a difference. And whenever we would travel, the first thing we would do is find out if there was an orphanage or a children's hospital or both in that city. And Mom and Dad would go when they were by themselves, but when us kids were with them, they would take us all. And we'd all troop in. Even Trigger went. I mean, good luck taking an animal into a hospital now, but Trigger went. Dad had special rubber shoes made that went over his horseshoes. And he went in and reared up and whinnied for the little kids. And yeah, it was a different world than we're living in now, when everything has to be so sterile and politically correct, and I don't know. I think in a lot of ways, it was nicer back then. Maybe not better, but nicer. Well, COVID has changed everything. Yeah, it's a different world definitely than what I grew up in. I also have a channel called WesternStarsTheater.com that's out there, but YouTube has both the interviews that I did, and that's called Along the Trail, and Western Stars Theater is also, and they're free. There's no charge on any of those. So I hope people will come and visit me. I would love it. You can contact me through my website.
And your books are?
My books are Cowboy Princess, Life with My Parents, and Cowboy Princess Rides Again. For like 40 years, my folks were Americana.